Alexander Skarsgård discovers a dark, hedonistic subculture at a vacation resort in Infinity Pool. Your biggest fears manifest into reality in the new horror film Fear, and Jennifer Lopez and Josh Duhamel are a bickering couple who have to save their families from pirates in Shotgun Wedding. All this and more is being released this weekend. Hello guys, I am the Hick Critic, here bringing you my opinions of the films that were just released. As always, keep in mind these are my own personal opinions. Feel free to check out any of the films that seem interesting to you, and if you do decide to see any of the films reviewed today, make sure to comment below what you thought of it to have it possibly featured in an upcoming episode. Let's dive right in. The first film tonight is Infinity Pool, an art house film that is so self-brown-nosed that it could be easily mistaken for a project straight out of film school. A married couple, played by Alexander Skarsgård and Cleopatra Coleman, are staying at a resort on an island when they run into another couple, played by Mia Goth and Thomas Kretschmann. But after a terrible accident, the protagonist is thrust into a dark, hedonistic world where there are no rules and the rich can get away with murder. I'm not gonna beat around the bush. I hated this movie. A lot. Out of all the films I've experienced this year so far, this is the film that I would least like to experience a second time, and I'm not sure it's gonna be beat. This entire film feels like something that one would make for a modern art museum. Just slap a bunch of really disturbing and disgusting images on the screen, regardless of cohesion or logic, write about 15 minutes of story with more holes in it than Swiss cheese, and try to pass that off as a film. Now, I will be fair to it. It actually started off okay. The film, for all its faults, does know how to create an uneasy atmosphere. But slowly and slowly, the film got worse and worse as the film just keeps trying to shock the audience and nothing else. And by the time I got to the film's 5-minute Technicolor psychedelic orgy scene, which is in there for no story or character reasons that I can think of, that's when I realized that this is a film that's completely style over substance. The only point from any of this that I can ascertain is that rich people can do whatever they want and suffer no consequences for their actions, which, you know, I have seen so many Eat the Rich films from the last several years, and I'm actually starting to get sick of it. Unless you're going to actually do something new with it, or just go beyond that surface level message, I fail to see what purpose you can have in bringing up the message that rich people do terrible things, and then just present it in such an extreme manner. If you're gonna have all this kind of lurid content, the extreme violence, the graphic sexuality, and the mixture of the two, you need to make sure that it's done with purpose, or at least to characters that we care about. Purposeless, explicit material doesn't make you edgy or shocking or avant-garde. It makes you seem like a neophyte desperately trying to come across as edgy, shocking, or avant-garde. I'm still trying to figure out why Brandon Cronenberg thought it was a good idea to include a random shot of a group of Hasidic Jews all wearing long fake noses, other than as a last-ditch effort to try to get some kind of disgusted reaction out of the audience. Keep in mind, I'm not simply bashing this film solely because it's different or violent or offensive. I genuinely think this script is terrible. The main character was such a bore, and I didn't care about anything that was happening to him. The film's premise also doesn't make any sense. Like, what kind of government would impose the death penalty for minor offenses, but then offer the rich the possibility to escape the death penalty by cloning themselves and then executing that clone? A government with that kind of policy would fall apart very easily. The film seems to try to excuse any inconsistencies like that by saying that it's art with a capital A, that it's, you know, all just a metaphor. But something like that still needs to be internally consistent or logical within the confines of the film, and this isn't. Maybe if the film was entirely dreamlike, you know, something like Only God Forgives, maybe it could have worked. But it tried to keep one foot firmly planted in reality, and that was a huge mistake. And look, I actually did have a brief conversation with an older gentleman outside the theater once my screening was over, and he seemed to like it, or at least he found it interesting. He said that at least it was different than a standard typical blockbuster, and he appreciated it about that. And yeah, I get that. I get that people want to watch something different, something outside the mainstream. I myself have enjoyed many an art house film. So I don't want to discount the opinions of people who say that they enjoy this movie, since clearly I'm in the minority here, but I'm also not going to lie to you about what my opinions on this film is. And I just thought that the film's simplistic themes were not enough to justify the extreme content. It was deeply unpleasant, and because of how cold, distant, and empty everything ended up, I left the theater just feeling depressed. Infinity Pool gets an empty shot. Next up is Fear, yet another January horror schlock that somehow managed to get a wide release in theaters despite not even being good enough for streaming. The premise, when you get down to it, is very simple. A group of young adults decide to spend their weekend at a lodge in the middle of the woods that, unbeknownst to them, manifests their deepest fears into reality and kills them. Not a bad premise for a horror film. The execution, however, oh boy, this is terrible. All the hallmarks that plague awful horror films are in here. Fake jump scares, terrible dialogue, non-entity characters who are actually pretty terrible to each other to the point where you wonder why they're even friends, contrivances, weird camera angles for no reason, and it's boring as tar. And, of course, there's several things that make this one extra terrible. This movie explicitly makes references to COVID-19, and the threat of it looms at the forefront of the characters' minds. So much so that I actually thought the movie was supposed to take place in 2020. There's talk about 2-week quarantining, one set of characters have a mask literally hanging from their rearview mirror, no reference is made whatsoever to the vaccine, and they're all talking about COVID like it's something that just happened recently, and this is the first outing they've had since the lockdowns. But no, a quick glance at a date reveals that this movie actually does take place in 2023, but all the COVID-related dialogue feels like it takes place 3 years prior, to the point where I wouldn't be surprised if this was written in 2020 and the dialogue was just never updated. At least I hope that's the case. The whole entire reason that it's even here is to make a point about how the characters shouldn't be living in fear and locking themselves away, that they should be able to just go out and live their life. Which, maybe that could work as a message if it was handled more subtextually and not spelled out for the audience, or at the very least if the film was actually set in 2020 or even 2021. Now, it may seem like I'm harping on this point too much, but I'm not kidding when I say it pervades the film, to the point that it practically overshadows the main conflict. And at worst, you could make the argument that this film is exploiting people's fears about COVID to try to score some cheap scares, which could be seen as insensitive, to say the least. Oh, and the film also somehow manages to be inconsistent with its own premise. What's the gimmick? Your biggest fear comes alive and kills you. That's pretty simple. And yet this film somehow botches that very basic thing. One guy's biggest fear is claustrophobia. So, what, is he gonna get crushed to death? I originally thought he was going to be crushed by the hallways closing in on top of him. But no, he instead slams his head over and over into the sink until he bashes his brains in. So, here's a question. I may not be an expert on claustrophobia, but I'm pretty sure that smashing your own head into a bathroom sink does not equal claustrophobia. How exactly are his own fears manifesting and killing him if his death has nothing to do with his biggest fear? Unless he was just terrified of bathroom sinks and he was lying to his friends because he was embarrassed by it. On top of that, the film's just not scary. I didn't even flinch at the jump scares because they were just so predictable. And the film's entire plot is predictable. You know exactly what the method is going to be to take the Force down. And the build-up to the threat just takes way too long. It takes well over an hour before Fear even tries to kill one of the friends. Bad pacing can ruin a movie, and this is a prime example. I could go on, but I would just wind up rambling. It's just bad. Maybe only enjoyable to rip apart with your drunk friends at home, but I can't imagine anybody being genuinely scared by this. I'm afraid Fear only gets an empty shot. Next up is Maybe I Do, a romantic dramedy about two older married couples played by Richard Gere and Diane Keaton, and William H. Macy and Susan Sarandon. who both wind up unknowingly cheat with the other's spouse. And then things get even more complicated when they discover not only that, but that their children are actually a couple, played by Emma Roberts and Luke Bracey, and are currently having an argument over whether or not they even want to get married. So, yeah, the plot is about as contrived as you can get. Not only do you expect us to believe that, without knowing who any of these people are, the spouses both independently cheated on the parent of their child's partner. That is a lot to swallow, and honestly, the film doesn't do that great of a job at convincing you at its plausibility. And yeah, I guess now's as good a time as any to bring it up. This film is based on a stage play, and you can definitely tell. The way the dialogue is presented, the way scenes go on for so long, and the entire pacing of the story feels like something that would work better on the stage. And honestly, the plot would be a lot easier to swallow on the stage too, because the stage is already so abstract that you can stretch your suspension of disbelief a lot further. But a film is more grounded, so typically it has to follow rules that stage shows typically don't. But yeah, the dialogue is very stage-like. Characters go on long-winded spiels at the drop of a hat, and I could not tell you how many times this movie stops the story to have one of the characters give some kind of speech to another, and it has the most flowery and generic music playing in the background as if this was an episode of Full House. But don't get me wrong, when this film is funny, it can get genuinely funny. William H. Macy in particular gets some really funny one-liners, and the big reactions of all the adults when they discover who their potential in-laws are did get a laugh out of me. There's also a pretty funny bit where a televangelist starts testifying about the evils of adultery, and both Diane Keaton and Richard Gere have a funny reaction to it. And some of the conversations and ideas about what marriage means isn't terrible. Some of the lines here are actually kind of good, because that is the whole point of this story, to have the characters examine what exactly a marriage is and what it should be and what your expectations should be going in. It's not like this is a travesty of cinema, because it isn't. It's just that the script and directing needed more work. This is like draft one. Maybe if they restructured this, tightened up the pacing in some places, fleshed out the characters more, and changed the dialogue so it didn't sound so theatrical, this could have been something. If nothing else, there was a group of older women in my screening who did seem to be really enjoying themselves, and they laughed a decent amount of times. They certainly laughed more than I did. Now, if you need an old person cornball Woody Allen light film, I'd hesitate to dis-recommend it, because it is quite watchable, but I can't convince people that this is worth sitting through if they're not already predisposed to this genre. Maybe I Do gets a half-empty shot. Next up is You People, the new Netflix comedy from Blackish creator Kenya Barris, which could be described as a modern-day Guess Who's Coming to Dinner mixed with Meet the Parents, but with the added culture clash of the white Jewish family and a black Muslim family. And, yep, that's pretty much the premise. The film also has a stacked cast: Eddie Murphy, Julia Louis-Dreyfus, Jonah Hill, Lauren London, and Nia Long, just to name a few. This is a film that is just perfect for people that love cringe comedies. And admittedly, I am not one of those people. This is one of those films that oozes awkwardness in pretty much every single scene. A film that's trying to make you feel awkward, which I get was the point, but it's not something that I would call entertaining or meaningful. Maybe if all this awkwardness actually led to something genuinely insightful or interesting, it could be forgiven. But you already know what the lessons are going to be for each character from their first introduction. So you're basically stuck watching these people act insufferable as you wait for them to learn their movie-mandated moral. Yeah, we get it. Dreyfus' character learns not to be so hyper-woke when interacting with black people, and Murphy's character learns that Jonah Hill does genuinely love his daughter and is able to look past his skin color. These are not particularly new messages, and they're not really being explored in a new or different way. And the topics that the characters talk about, ranging from police brutality, the culture clash between the blacks and the Jews, gentrification, the COVID-19 vaccines, the storming of the Capitol. They're not really explored here. It just feels like surface-level conversation that you might find on Twitter. The desire to try to cram in so many social issues, buzzwords, and controversial topics into the dialogue does the film a disservice, because like I said, the film can't really dive into these topics because it has to move on to the next button-pushing topic. And on top of that, it's going to date this movie badly. And yeah, Julia Louis-Dreyfus is particularly annoying. Like, I get the character is supposed to be insensitive and not at all self-aware, but her performance is just annoying. I don't know what kind of direction she was given, but it was the wrong one. But even though this film has many elements that I greatly dislike, I don't want to out and out dismiss it either. There are a few funny or decent moments sprinkled in here or there. Eddie Murphy is actually the only actor in this film who managed to get genuine laughs out of me because of his matter-of-fact, blunt delivery of his lines. One scene that was genuinely hilarious was when Akbar is trying to bait Ezra into saying the N-word by getting him to say the name of a rap song. And there are aspects of this film that I feel like could work. I actually think that the relationship between Ezra and Amira has his moments. It actually does feel like a real relationship, and Jonah Hill and Lauren London's chemistry is honestly just fine. There's actually a scene where they have an argument, and it doesn't feel like one of those forced, contrived Hollywood arguments, but rather a real conversation between an engaged couple where you can see where both of them are coming from. It's a shame that the relationship doesn't get as much focus as it probably should have. This probably would have worked much better as a mini-series. Give the characters, the themes, and the ideas room to breathe, room to grow, and to let the events sink in. It still probably wouldn't have been great, but at least it wouldn't feel so jam-packed. Eddie Murphy alone elevates this one just enough to keep it away from my lowest rating. And yeah, as a side note, I really am glad that Murphy's come out of semi-retirement. Even after 40 years, the man still has mad talent. You People gets a half-empty shot. And for our final film tonight, the new action rom-com Shotgun Wedding. A film that, while obviously not great, something I doubt even the filmmakers would dispute, it manages to understand exactly what it is, and it doesn't try to be anything different. The film stars Jennifer Lopez and Josh Duhamel as a soon-to-be-wed couple who start having second thoughts just before their destination wedding. But then suddenly the whole entire wedding party, sans the couple, is taken hostage by a group of pirates, and it's up to the estranged couple to save everybody if they can avoid killing each other first. If I could describe this film in one word, it would be adequate. The film is structured how a film like this should be structured. The action scenes are okay and done fine. The chemistry between Jennifer Lopez and Josh Duhamel actually does work, and a lot of the jokes actually are okay, and they manage to elicit a chuckle out of me. There's no deeper meaning or subtext to anything, and there's not really that many surprises. Yeah, one of the film's big surprises is very easy to guess. But if you need one of these action rom-coms like, I don't know, say for a stay-at-home date night movie, or if you're just in the mood for something like this, I'd actually say it's kind of decent. Even still, there are a few things about it that do stand out about this. Jennifer Coolidge steals every single scene that she's in as Duhamel's mother. Some of the kill scenes were actually kind of shockingly nasty, which I was absolutely not expecting for a film like this. And like I said, the chemistry between Lopez and Duhamel works, and it's likable. There are stupid things that you can point out about this film. Some of the characters, good guys and bad guys alike, make dumb decisions to further the plot, or even just dumb decisions in general. Like, the bad guys are clearly trying to kill the couple, even though realistically they would be more useful to them alive, and obviously not every joke works. There's a really stupid scene where the hostages try to humanize themselves to their captors by shouting off random facts about themselves. An idea that should be funny in principle, but the directing of the scene feels too sluggish for it to be pulled off effectively. And as the film progresses, it does start to run out of steam by the time the climax rolls around. Not exactly nitpicks, and I definitely understand where people are coming from when they say that they didn't enjoy this film. But as a way to kill about an hour and 40 minutes, I personally had a pretty good time. It's a film that just wants to show up, entertain some people for a brief time before vanishing into the ether, and there's something almost unpretentious about that. I really wish I had more to say about it, but it really is that simple. If you think you'll hate it, you'll hate it. If you think you might like it, you just might. Shotgun Wedding gets a half-full shot. And now here's a quick recap of what I thought of the films reviewed for the week of January 27th, 2023. An empty shot for Infinity Pool, a film so soaked in extreme content, and yet it never coalesces into any kind of meaningful point. The film is currently in wide release. An Empty Shot for Fear, a staggeringly stupid film that utterly wastes its intriguing concept. The film is currently in wide release. A half-empty shot for Maybe I Do, a film that has a few decently funny moments but can't overcome a script that was not updated enough to transfer its contrived stage story to the big screen. The film is currently in limited release. A half-empty shot for You People, the race relations comedy that takes you on an awkward ride for very little payoff. The film is currently available for streaming on Netflix. And finally, a half-full shot for Shotgun Wedding, an action rom-com that elicits just enough laughs and thrills to warrant recommendation, especially for a date night rental. The film is currently available for streaming on Amazon Prime. So once again, only one good movie this week, and it's Shotgun Wedding. And even then, it was only a marginal recommendation. If you need something to check out specifically in theaters this week, a lot of theaters just started re-releasing the films that were nominated for Oscars. So maybe check out some of those. And remember, if you want to see my early thoughts of any film I watch or to read more of my reviews, make sure to check out my Letterboxd account. The link to that is in the description below. That's it for now. Next time, a group of older ladies try to wiggle their way into the Super Bowl in the new comedy 80 for Brady, and a gay couple and their young daughter are forced to make an impossible decision to prevent the apocalypse in M. Night Shyamalan's new thriller, Knock at the Cabin. Make sure that you're subscribed so that you don't miss any upcoming episodes. Have a good day, and I'll see you next weekend.